friendship, blameless birth, cherish these, naught else has worth. Is there anywhere on earth perfect freedom, sorrow's dearth, selfless friendship, blameless birth, cherish these, naught else has worth. Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share Thy love.
Namaste, everyone. Well, we are so appreciative of all of you, and whenever we come to Chennai or we meet you elsewhere, there's such kindness, and you make us feel so much like family. And so we thought for that reason to also speak maybe more personally tonight, because we feel a close bond of friendship with you. And so what we're going to talk about this evening is our own spiritual journey, not focusing on us as individuals, but on, I think, the principles that are involved for all of us in the search for God. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asked Krishna the question, what happens if I seek God, if I practice yoga, and I don't reach the goal? Is that effort all lost? And of course, in his usual manner of being forever reassuring and comforting, Krishna says, no effort is ever lost, Arjuna. Whatever spiritual effort we make in one lifetime, if we don't reach the goal, we pick it up again in the next lifetime. And I think for all of us who have been drawn to Yoganandaji's path, I think this is true. This is not a path for beginners. It is not a path for curiosity seekers. It is not a quick and easy path. It is a path for those who want liberation and are willing to work at it, dedicate their lives in that search. And I think my unique experiences, your unique experiences, if you recall, if you think back to your life, it really is a matter of awakening. Patanjali defined samadhi as smriti, as memory. And so it isn't that we have to discover the states of higher consciousness. We need to remember them because they are our own innate soul nature, but we've forgotten them. That's the problem. We remember only the moments of this life and caught up in the problems and the demands of this outward life that we happen to be in this incarnation. But there's another part of us that remembers a faraway experience, a faraway land, one might even say, that we know is our home. And we know that we are far from home in this world. This is not our home. I remember as a child, I was quite young, the first time I saw a photo of Yogananda. It must have been an advertisement for autobiography of a yogi in a magazine and in America. And I remember just looking at his picture and just being very intrigued. I didn't know what nationality, I didn't know anything, but I remember just looking at that picture for a long time. And then years went by, and I was in the 12th form and taking a course in world literature, and our teacher had us read the Bhagavad Gita. And when I read it, it was so familiar to me, so beautiful. I just thought, these are the most subtle, beautiful truths I've ever read in my life. And this teacher, she was an American woman, that one might expect, but she was a member of the Vedanta Society in America, which was started by Vivekananda when he came to the West. And so and in this city where I was living, St. Louis, Missouri, in the Midwest, there was a large Vedanta center there. And she said, if some of you are interested, you might like to go. So I remember with 3 of my girlfriends, we went one Sunday, to hear the Swami give a discourse. And he was rather well known in the West, Swami Pranabananda. But he was quite old by this time. And he had his English was very, very hard to understand, just as I think our English might be a little hard for you to understand. But so I couldn't really understand much of what he said. But he was quite old, and his little face was just wrinkled with lines of bliss. And I just remember looking at him, and again, it was like a moment of memory of having a teacher in orange robes, an Indian, and just feeling the bliss of someone who had dedicated their life to the search for God. And then some years went by, I finished my college education, and someone handed me that familiar face, Autobiography of a Yogi, and I read it. But some people, when they read autobiography, they say, that's it, I found my way. But for me, it wasn't like that. I got about 3/4 of the way through. I got to the resurrection of Sri Yukteswar, and I said, I don't know about this book. This is a little too much for me to really come to deal with. So I kind of put it aside. But the same person who gave me the autobiography I said, I'd like to learn how to meditate. And he said, well, okay, we can, why don't we go to, a nearby church. There weren't any temples, and just a Christian church, and you can meditate there. And so I said, okay. And so I didn't know any techniques. I didn't know any prayers. I knew it was about closing your eyes and being quiet, and that was about all that I knew. So I sat down and I began meditating as well as I could understand what it was. And quite quickly, I just felt this wonderful joy. And it was like the memories were coming back of having practiced before. And we walked out, this friend and I had been meditating there, and I said, it's all inside yourself. And he was taking the YSS, SRF lessons. He said, oh, no. You have to take these lessons, and you have to do these techniques. And I thought, I must have gotten something wrong here. But then, so he said, well, you start taking these lessons and you'll learn how to meditate. So I started taking them, getting the lesson in the mail. But for some people, that's just fine, and they're very fulfilled with that, and I honor and respect that. But for me, I thought, I know my nature. I need a teacher. I need someone who will be my guide, personal, answer my questions, getting a little lesson in the mail. It's not going to work for me, I know. So then, but I was getting the lessons, and then my friend who had given me the autobiography told me about the YSS, SRF. He handed me a little brochure, just like, why don't you hand that up? It was just a little black and white, but it was just one sheet, 8.5 by 11 folded, copied, mimeographed off, and it said Ananda Meditation Retreat. And I looked at that, and again, it was like God was throwing out breadcrumbs, trying to lead me, here, come this way, come this way, come this way. And I saw that, and I thought, that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to finish my college. I had one more final to take, and I took that final. I didn't even stay for graduation, though I had graduated with honors, and I knew that part of my life was over. And I'd done it the best that I could, and I was done. But I have to say a little aside. My major was anthropology, and I had been a very diligent student, and I had always prepared, and I got, without being prideful, because it really didn't matter to me, but I just always got the highest marks and all that. But by the time I was at my last semester, I was really tired of it all, and I had a course in African literature, African tribal literature, which I really didn't care about at all. So I never read any of the books. I would write papers, but I would just make them up, and the meaning of this book, and I would take the test, and I would make up all the answers because I had no idea what the subject matter was. I got a very high mark. And I thought, I missed something here. I was doing all the studying, and I got the same mark as when I didn't even read the material. So anyway, that was like Divine Mother was telling me, this isn't what it seems. So then I went out to Ananda, and it was quite a journey. I was 22 years old. I was just a single person, and I got a ride from the student ride board. They do that in America, and we got a ride all the way out to California, and then I took a bus from where I was let off in the San Francisco area up to Ananda, and then someone met me from Ananda at the bus station, and it was the beginning of a new life. It was the beginning of my life, even though I was 22, because up till that point, and I think this is true for many devotees, up till that point in life, I thought, this isn't really my life. I'm just doing what everyone else thinks I'm supposed to be doing, but it's not really my life. And then they picked me up, and I was from a nice home and refined and highly educated. They picked me up in this old pickup truck, and they said, okay, just get in the back. And I kind of climbed in the back of the pickup truck, and I thought, this is going to be an adventure, and I'm ready for this adventure. Whatever, I knew that Divine Mother, and I didn't know he was my guru at the time, that Master was my guru, but I just knew this is the beginning of your education. Up till this point, it's just been superficial. And so this pickup truck dropped me off on what is the lawn of the Ananda Village, and I had my little suitcases, and I didn't know, there was no one there. I didn't know what to do, but I saw an old folded rusty lawn chair leaning against a tree, and I had mainly been a student all my life, so I thought, well, okay, and I unfolded the lawn chair and sat down and waited for the teacher to come, because that's what you do in college. And sure enough, this man walked up. And he had on shorts, and he had a very colorful shirt on, and his hair was long, but he had it tied back in a little knot at the back of his head. And he just walked up to me. I didn't know who he was. And he said, you look like a Phi Beta Kappa, which is an honorary society, which I'd been traveling for 4 days without changing my clothes, or I didn't look like much of anything. I looked like something that climbed off the back of a pickup truck, which is what had happened. And And I said, well, that's true. And then he just smiled and he said, welcome. And then he kept walking. And I didn't know who he was, but there was a sense of purpose about him. A sense of, he was different than anyone I had ever met. There was a sense of inner power. There was a sense of, I don't know, purpose is the best word. Like, I know what I need to do with my life, and it has nothing to do with what anyone else thinks or says. And then I just looked at him as he moved away, and then someone came up and said, that's Swami Kriyananda, and he's the man who started this. And I didn't know if that was who he was. But then you begin, Swamiji would give on weekends, every weekend he would give Saturday, he would lead the meditation. He was, he had spent a lot of time in India, and he loved India. And so we had this beautiful remote little place called the Meditation Retreat. And on Saturday morning, Swami would wear his little orange dhoti, and he would have his madranga drum. And we were just sleeping in tents, and there was not much built yet, or under, in little sleeping bags. And he would walk around to all the little camping areas with his madranga drum, chanting to wake us up to come to morning sadhana. He just wandered through the forest chanting, and we'd wake up and go into the temple, pick the leaves out of our hair, and but it was like the beginning of life, the beginning of my life. And he would teach us every weekend, and teach us the meditation techniques and about his guru, about Yogananda ji, and about the spiritual life. And then in the evenings he would usually do a morning long discourse, and then he would meet with individuals in the afternoon. In the evenings he would sing songs or show us slides of India. But it was as though he was putting out this vibration. And he was very impersonal. It wasn't like, oh, how are you? Did you understand this? He was just a channel for God and Guru. And you either got it or you didn't. He didn't try to push it on you. But there was a small group of us, maybe 15 or 20, Jayaji, Sadhana Devi, Shivani, Jyotish, Haridas came in the following year, but there was a small group of Shivani, did I say, who, it was like we got it. We got it that this is what we're supposed to do with our life. And, the beginning of the spiritual path, whatever age you pick it up with, it's often thrilling. It's often, oh, I've been looking for this. Oh, here's my guru. Here are the teachings. Oh, Babaji. Oh, Kriya Yoga. Oh, I'm going to find God. And oftentimes people have very deep meditations and visions and deep experiences when they first start the path. Jayaji put it very well. He said, it's as though we're cashing in our spiritual bank account from our past life. And so God's trying to say, see, remember all those wonderful experiences you had? Here they are. And you think, oh, this is easy. I can do this. This is going to be, and every day you meditate and you're just having this wonderful time. And then it's like when the guru knows that you're hooked, he stops. He says, okay, now you have to start walking forward on your own momentum now. I've kind of drawn you in, but now the testing comes. And this happens to everyone. God tests us to see our sincerity, to see if we can overcome our karmic obstacles and still keep seeking God. And it goes on, and it's not easy. The spiritual path is not easy. It's not for weaklings. It's for people with energy and commitment, and who are willing to do whatever God puts in front of them, and saying, no matter if you take it all away, it doesn't matter. Some of you may have met or will meet soon Nayaswamis Jyotish, who is an American who will be moving to India in June to be one of our acharyas here. He's a wonderful friend of ours for many years. he had a very beloved wife who died early of cancer in her probably early 40s, and after that he went through some severe health challenges himself. And he was so sweet. He said to us a few months ago, he said, "You know, Divine Mother has taken everything away from me. She took away my wife, who was my best friend. She took away my health. The house he was living in, the property was sold, so took away my house." And he said, "So I'm really free now." There's you know, and he, that's the spirit of a true disciple. But I also remember I had been at Ananda for about 3 years, and you know, I had Kriya even. But I remember a day where there was a woman who was visiting. She was a Swami. She was a disciple of Shivananda. She was she was an Indian woman, but she was a disciple of Shivananda, direct disciple. And she came to Ananda to give a program, discourse. And I remember she kept talking about her guru. And and with so much love and so much devotion. And I just kept, afterwards I felt, oh, I wish I had that much love for Yogananda ji, because I could feel how it was muffled. It wasn't fully expressed. And then I was walking back to my little kutir where I was living, and all of a sudden I felt it within my own heart. I do love my guru that much. I do have that much life commitment. I just haven't connected with it yet. And it was as though the guru was awakening within my heart the recognition, the memory that, of course I'm your guru, you foolish girl. You just haven't really opened your eyes to what your life is. And then it was like, oh, of course. What do you think you've been doing? And that's that moment where it's like you look at what you've been doing, your practices, your devotion, your inner renunciation, and it's like you look and you see, oh yes, I am doing this. I do believe this. And that moment happens over and again, where you go deeper and deeper into the understanding that this is my life. This spiritual path is what I've chosen to do. And the years go by, and many things happen over those years. You may go through periods where your meditation is going very well. And we all do this. I remember times where I would just sit to meditate and have wonderful experiences. And then the clock ticks and it's a new day, and you think, I don't know how to meditate at all. I can't concentrate. I can't focus my mind. I can't feel devotion. And you just say, what happened? But it's in those dry spells that God is testing the real depth of your love. If you only love me when you're having wonderful experiences, is that true devotion? But if you can say, if you come or you don't come, I am here. I wait for your coming. And so there's these cycles where your experience of your own spiritual life gets deeper through your own recognition of your own commitment. That's a lot of what it is, that I really do want this. And I don't want it for any outward experiences, for any recognition. I only want it because it's who I am. It's the deepest part of my own being. Why does a rose, like these beautiful roses, why do they grow in those beautiful colors? Because it's who they are. Because it's just the nature, it's the nature of our soul to move towards God, and so God, just the whole Master calls this the spiritual journey the divine romance, where little by little we awaken to the reality of our own love for God, of our own commitment. And then you come to a stage where, in a sense, the testing doesn't have to happen anymore, where you have proved to yourself your own determination to find God. And then it's not that things become easy. In a certain sense, just as Devarshi said, God takes everything away, but it doesn't matter. You don't really notice, because you just think, I am so happy to be able to love you and serve you. I remember about 2 years ago, we were going through a very, very demanding time in our life, and just were pushing, this was in America, but pushing with everything we had just to handle what was coming. And I remember coming home one evening just so tired and so glad to be done with the day. And then the phone rang, and it was a very dear friend of mine who said, I've just become sick and I really need some help. Do you think you could bring over some medicine? And I just said, of course, and I got back in the car and I brought her what she needed, and then I was driving home. And again, not to personalize this, but it was a very beautiful experience, because as I was driving home, the tears were just running down my cheeks, because I thought, thank you, God, for showing me when I thought I was done, there was still more that I could give. And that's what God does. When we think, you think you're giving a lot, I think you can give a little bit more. Let's try. And it just keeps going like that till we watch Swami Kriyananda, who at the end of his life, some of you have had the blessing to meet him. He was our spiritual teacher for more than 45 years and really formed us spiritually as disciples of Master, as he was. And at the end of his life, somebody was telling us that this was in Bangalore, that when they came to Pune to see him, and they had made the journey, but when they got there, unfortunately, he was in the hospital. He had just taken ill. He was ill quite a lot at the end of his life. And they thought, we won't get to see him. But then he came home, back to his home there, and the word came that no, he would see people. And so they thought that, he would just be sitting there and they would come and, he would bless them. But this friend told us that he just stood up and he gave a discourse for an hour and just giving them energy. And that was the only time they ever saw them. And I think he knew that he so much wanted to bring Master's teachings to India, and he knew my time is short, but I will not put any barriers up of what I will do. And so those are the stages that come where you begin to feel, Lord, there's nothing you can ask me that I won't say yes to. All I want is to be able to focus more and more my mind, my heart, my will, my attunement on becoming one with you. And in the end, I'm not at the end of my life, I don't think. We are driving in traffic tomorrow, but be that as it may. But your life becomes very simple. And all the turbulence and all the emotions and the moods and all those things, they just begin receding. And you just feel the simplicity of your love for God. And if we have to come back another lifetime, if all of us have to come back, we'll do it. It's not our choice. It's whatever Master wants. But in your heart that there's very little left to do. Swami said once that by the time a devotee gets to the point where they really want to know God, if we think of all our hundreds of thousands of incarnations as a 24-hour clock, by the time you get to the point where you say, Lord, I want you, there's just a few ticks of the second hand left. And I think that's true for all of us. Master has called us, not because we're just beginning on the journey, but he's called us because as he says in his beautiful poem, God's Boatman, as long as there are a few stray brothers left weeping by the wayside. And that's us. We've been making the journey, but maybe we haven't reached the shores of divine bliss yet. But Master promised, those who stick with this path till the end, I or one of the line of gurus will personally usher them into the freedom of the astral world. So each journey is unique. Each journey is an example of God's Leela with the devotee. But for each of us, if we can find that place of strength and ever daily commitment to the spiritual life, we have to believe in our Master's words that we too will find God in this lifetime.
I'll speak just a little bit and then we'll have a chance for questions. You know, each person's journey is really very unique to that person. We come in with different qualities, with different talents, one might say, with different energy patterns, with different basic desires. And so every pathway, like a drop of water on a windshield, you know, you watch it and you don't know how it's going to get to the bottom. You know it's going to get down there, but you don't know whether it's going to go down in a relatively straight line or it's going to come down and get stopped and then some other drops join it. And at any rate, we're all very different from each other, but there are certain underlying qualities that are at play for all of us. So for all of those different drops of water, there's the resistance of the windshield, the friction of the windshield. There's the pull of gravity that's pulling it down. And there's probably some obstacles in the way. You don't know, for each one it's individual, but the pattern for everyone is the same. And so it is for us that there are certain things that make the path work and other things that essentially, if you don't do some of the simple things, it doesn't work very well. But I would say for me, it was almost as if the primary qualities were just a couple of them. One was a certain kind of enthusiasm or determination and the ability to say yes to almost anything that came and almost any request that Swami made. I met him before Ananda got started. And so when I met him, the whole of Ananda, one could say, was a Thursday night satsang in a room about as big as this with about this many people. 15, 20 people. He had a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. And in his living room, on Thursday evenings, he would have a satsang. And we would come, and there again, the patterns, you know, the basic patterns, they haven't changed since Swami's apartment. Came together, we chanted a little bit, he had a prayer, he chanted a little bit, we meditated, usually about 20 minutes or so. Then he gave a discourse, and then he answered questions. Pretty much exactly what we're doing tonight, you know, how much chanting there is, how much meditation there is as opposed, but basically the same thing. So it's not like the experiences to which we were exposed are different from the experiences to which all of you are exposed. And so what were the qualities that kind of sifted out those who stayed and those who left? Some people meditated better than others or were more enthusiastic in that. Some worked harder than others. Some, I don't know, seemed brighter than others, and some didn't. You know, you think, oh, well, it's an intelligence test. And there are people with us now who, you know, as Devi did, she came from, you know, nice success in college and graduation. Well, we had people joining who hadn't been to college at all, didn't have a trained mind, didn't seem all that bright, but were enthusiastic. And some of those, it just doesn't matter very much. The real qualities, I think, that are important is that you somehow, you really want to know God. For some, it's because you really love God. For others, it's because I wouldn't say that I was driven primarily by devotion. It's taken me a long time to soften my heart or to open my heart until the quality of devotion has come more to the forefront. I would say I was driven more by the desire to know the truth, to know what consciousness was, and this was the channel by which I could find it. But religion or spirituality, when I was a teenager, I had rejected religion and rejected spirituality. I didn't think any answers were there. It seemed like a bunch of beliefs that were held by old people who didn't have much energy or much enthusiasm or creativity or anything. And I, you know, up until I was 12 or 13, my parents dragged me to church, and I went. And then when I was about 13, I said, this is just meaningless to me. And they didn't drag me there anymore. At age 15, the last possible thing I would have said would have come to pass was that I would have a life that included spirituality. It just wasn't there. But I did have a drive to accomplish things, a drive to do things, an enthusiasm, wanting to do things well. You know, I was an athlete, and I was always trying to improve and be the best I could. And so there was a lot of energy, but it wasn't directed, and certainly wasn't directed spiritually. So when I read the autobiography, I was very interested in consciousness. And for the first time in reading the autobiography, I read somebody who absolutely I felt was speaking the truth. And he was speaking about a realm of consciousness that was vast beyond anything that I had considered scientifically or otherwise, but I knew was truthful and was extremely attractive and resonated with something like, oh yeah, I knew that. I had just never been told that. And so when I first met Swamiji, I would say my pathway has almost been a series of almost daily saying yes to some challenge that was there. You know, if you drive a car at night on a country road, you don't know the road, you don't know what's ahead of you. You can remember a little bit of what's behind you, but you can only see as far as the headlights let you see. And if we translate to time, basically you can only see a day at a time, and sometimes not even a day. And so you can drive from here to the Indian border at the north by only seeing 100 meters ahead with the headlights. And you can follow a spiritual path that will consume your whole life by doing it a day at a time. But that day at a time requires enthusiasm, and it requires a sense of adventuresomeness. Because if you won't tread into the unknown, then you will circumscribe your life to always be that which you already know. And so the spiritual path challenges us to become something that we aren't at this very moment, challenges us to accept something that's deeper, it resides within us, but it, as Devi was saying, it hadn't yet come to the fore, it hadn't yet blossomed. And so those little buds that are on a tree, you don't know whether they're going to turn into pretty leaves or pretty flowers or whatever they are. They haven't blossomed, but there's a pattern to them. And so I would say that for me, service, enthusiastic service, doing a day at a time the very best I could see to do. And it's not always the best you can see to do. You know, you look back and there are days when you don't feel like doing anything. You don't feel like putting out energy. You don't feel like you're wanting to rise to the challenge. And everybody has those days. But there's, I don't know, a kind of a determination to keep on keeping on. And you just keep doing that day by day by day, and gradually it's almost like the other things in your life begin to fall away or erode. It's not a quick process. I've never known anybody that decides they're going to be on the spiritual path and some bolt of lightning comes and their personality changes enormously and now they're saints. And at least in my experience, you know, once in a while you read a story like that, but you know, those people, it wasn't by chance that they had that sudden transformation. They're karmically ready for it. But for most of us, it's almost like process of erosion of, you know, our minds, our energy, our devotion, everything. It's like we're maybe a nugget of gold, but with a thick shield of mud and incrustation around it. And it takes rain and wind and day after day after day to begin to wash all of that away. But it does wash away if we stick with it. And, you know, the lump of gold is inert. There isn't a sense of will. But for us, we have to expose ourselves enthusiastically to the best of our ability to the process. We have to meditate. Whether we meditate deeply or not, I don't know of anyone who is deep on the spiritual path who doesn't make the effort to meditate. And it's a deep effort on, you know, you can't say every day you've really done the very best. I think if you could, you'd make very quick progress. But you do the best you can. And you keep doing the best you can. So we've got to meditate. We've got to do sadhana. We've got to open ourselves to the Guru. We've got to open ourselves to the influence of other people who are also trying. For Ananda, Satsang has been enormously important. And yet there are many people who have made fine progress without the ability to they've made fine progress without, I don't know, the ability to have access to very many other people. But those people have made somehow a deep connection with the Guru, and they've maintained that inward connection. You know, Master's 3 most advanced disciples, they all worked in the world. We think, oh, well, you know, you go into the ashram and you're with the Guru or you're with other spiritual seekers, and therefore that's how you make spiritual progress. But Master's 3 most advanced disciples, 2 of them never lived in the ashram, and they had very, very high-level executive jobs in the corporate world. And the third, the most advanced woman disciple, didn't come to Master until she was quite old, quite elderly, and didn't move there until she was, I think, in her 60s, maybe even her 70s. And so it's not as if the environment is going to produce sanctity. It's rather that when very little else matters, then why not be in a spiritual environment? But it's karmically determined. So I say that in part because there's a thought among many people that, well, it's easy for you because you haven't had to work in the world. But we've all had our challenges. Yes, we've had the support of satsang that is more, but the challenge of working hard, of facing tests, of facing challenges is, I would say it's, if I look at my 2 brothers, for instance, I've faced more challenges in a harsher reality than they have in their lives, you know, and they've worked in the world their whole lives. But it's been an easier path, but I don't know, they haven't been intensely exposing themselves to the spiritual process. And so I think that really that's almost the whole secret, is to say, yes, I want to do whatever I can this day to do my best, to be in tune to the best I can see and do, and I want to keep doing that and doing that and doing that. And when you do that, 100 meters at a time, that car will drive across the whole of India. And day by day, a devotee will drive across the whole ocean of delusion in that. And as Devi said, eventually it's not, how to put this, it's not that you're forced to give up anything. It's that the things that mattered just don't matter anymore. They just fall away. And it's not like I have to make a big effort. Oh, I can't want jewelry. I can't want watches. I've got to stop. I just have absolutely no desire whatsoever to carry around extra weight, you know? And so things that are important to other people or important to me earlier on in my life simply are not important anymore. And at least I would say for most of us who have done this process and done it sincerely, you arrive at the point where the only thing that matters to us anymore is trying to have moksha, trying to connect with God, trying to serve God as well as we can, and everything else has fallen away. But then we look at Swamiji, and what replaces that kind of, and not just Swamiji, I look at a lot of people at Ananda, and what replaces that sense of desire or wanting or striving is just a sense of joy and happiness and contentment and peace. And, you know, things just, so what? Whether you're in traffic or not in traffic, if it's a heavy day or a rainy day, or none of that matters anymore. All that matters is the relationship with Master, the relationship with God, the kind of trying to do your best, trying to be kind, and everything else it's become very, very simple. Life has become very clear and very simple and very, very fulfilling. But it isn't fulfilling because desires are getting fulfilled, which was the pattern earlier on. It's just fulfilling because that's the nature of it. It's like the color of a rose or the scent of the rose. It's just the nature of things. And when you give your life to God, eventually everything else falls away and everything just turns out beautifully. So we'll answer some questions if you have any.
The questions can be about any topic, not just what we've shared.
How do we really put out a lot of energy without forcing ourselves during the dry periods?
Okay, how do we put out a lot of energy without forcing ourselves?
Being forced.
Yeah. I would say you have to force yourself a little bit, but not greatly. You don't go against your own nature or go against the sense of, I don't know, the sense that you want to do it. You know, you can feel tired and be reluctant to do something, but you still want to do it. And so don't force yourself beyond your kind of point of willingness. But up to that point, I would say you need to use some force. Because if you're too passive, you don't make much progress either. But don't go to the point where you break your will.
Swamiji said that when he was a young monk at Master's ashram, he was trying so hard to meditate, but there was tension involved with it. And he said to Master once, "Am I not trying hard enough? I don't feel like I'm making spiritual progress with my meditation." And Master said, "You're trying too hard because there's tension involved." And so it's that balance of where you want to exert that enthusiastic willpower, but just like with the energization exercises, you want to tense the muscles so that you feel that flow of energy, using the willpower to draw the energy, but not so much so it hurts. Just we want to use that enthusiasm and use that energy so we feel a joyful flow, and then try to stay in that zone and expand it. But oftentimes, I think it's probably more true of young men than young women, but they get their will so involved in their meditation, and then they break their will. Swami said also once, he was so determined to find God that he said, "I am going to meditate until I find God." And he went for a long time, I think 24 hours or something. And at the end of that time, he didn't have the experience he was looking for, and he became very discouraged. And he kind of didn't apply himself so much to meditation after that. So just to, something that we've said that was something that was implied in what we said, but we didn't say it directly. Every person has to individually walk the spiritual path. No one can tell you how hard to try. No one can tell you how disciplined to be. You have to, that's between you and God. And you have to feel that within yourself and say, "God, am I doing well now? If I'm not, help me understand. If I am, then I'll keep going." So everyone, the spiritual path is really individual for every single one of us, unique. And that's the beauty of it. And you can have teachers, you can have guides, but ultimately it's between you and God.
Yeah, so the question is, if karma attracts you to certain situations, and especially if they repeat, how do you understand what's going on? Karma does attract you to situations, but it's less specific kinds of actions, and it's more patterns. So let's say that there's a pattern of passivity in the face of something that is unfair. So you've had lives where you've had dominant parents who have kind of pressured you unfairly, and you've just been quiet and wilted under the pressure. And so that sets up a mental pattern. And your soul wants to be free from that. But how is it going to be free from it unless it gets exposed to that situation, not necessarily from your parents, but to someone trying to dominate you unfairly? And so you'll be attracted to that pattern in a repetitive way until you figure out what it is that's trying to be learned here. But so I wouldn't look so much at the incidents and the specifics. I would look for trying to understand what the pattern is. And especially if there's a repeating pattern, then that is definitely a soul karmic lesson that you've come to learn. And the more you can be open to learning, and understanding isn't really necessary. Understanding enough to see that I have been repeatedly in this pattern, in many different variations of it this whole life. And you don't even really need to understand, well, let me figure out what in past lives has drawn this. You just need to see the pattern, and then you need to really ask, how do I change my energy? How do I change my magnetism around that so that I don't keep repeating that same pattern? And each individual will have to, maybe somebody can help guide you, but basically you have to understand from the inside. In this case, I've used something relatively simplistic. You have to come to the realization, I have been too passive in accepting the dominance of other people. I have to stand up to them. I have to find my own strength. And when you once get that energy going, sometimes those karmic patterns just go poof, like soap bubbles. They seem very solid until you put out the kind of countering magnetism, and then they just pop. And you may never be bothered by that particular thing again. So we have hundreds of these potential karmic patterns that we have, and mainly life will give us opportunities to find those challenges, but the fastest way to untie those things, because they're dependent on, one could say, programs in the subtle spine. The fastest way is not one by one to go through and delete each of those commands. Fastest way is to take that programmed hard disk and expose it to magnetism, and then they all begin to fall away. So Kriya Yoga is a way of undoing those patterns, and you may never face it, may never understand it, may never even know it was there, but Kriya Yoga dissolves it for you.
I'll just add briefly also, if you find these repetitive patterns in yourself, instead of saying, oh no, not that, here it comes again, I'm going to have a boss that's always yelling at me, just to pull back and say, welcome it. Say, if this is my karma to have a boss that always yells at me and blames me when it isn't justified, let me just say, let it come. Master explained the saying of Christ in the Bible, the real mystical meaning about turning the other cheek. If your enemy slaps you, turn the other cheek. It wasn't that he was saying, okay, hit me again, hit me again. It was more, if I have this karma coming to me of a blow, let me turn the other cheek and get it over with. And so it's a very good practice. If there's a karmic pattern, we think, oh, please don't let this happen again. You think, no, let it happen again and again until I am done with that karma. And once you get that freedom to say, I want to experience this because it's balancing out, it's bringing me closer to freedom, it's amazing what happens. Then it doesn't come, and you think, well, wait a minute, I'm waiting for this. I want it to come. I want to find freedom, but it just doesn't come. It's like we turn the tables on the karma. Instead of saying, no, that's going to hurt, I'm going to be upset, you think, I want that because I want freedom. So it's a very, look at the patterns, don't run away from them, don't cringe inwardly, but say, let's get done with this.
And I'll just add, maybe finally, that the karma is never outside of you. So you're not going to fix it by fixing the boss, or fixing the parent, or fixing the husband, or fixing the whatever. You're going to fix it basically by being so fed up with that situation happening over and over again that you reject that pattern inside your own self. And so the patterns that come to us, the things that come to us, are really only extensions of your own inner self in solidified form so that you can see them and come to grips with them.
You had a second question? That's a wonderful question. The difference, to know when to surrender and when to use willpower. Maybe you help me with this. There's a very beautiful prayer that is used in people who are trying to go through transformation. Lord, give me the serenity to accept what I cannot change, the courage. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to face that which I can change, and the wisdom to know the difference. Yeah. So that's for the wisdom to recognize, like, for example, you've heard us talk about the forest fire. There was nothing, it was so obvious, there was nothing we could do about that but surrender. But in that surrender, we had to use the willpower to be positive and to keep going. So they're not separate. It's such a wonderful concept, surrender and willpower. It takes willpower to surrender. And it takes surrender then to your life as a devotee to find the willpower to keep going. So they're intertwined.
Yeah, real surrender to the divine takes a lot of courage. But I would say the wisdom to know the difference is never surrender to something that you don't feel is dharmic. Never surrender to a battle, never surrender to a person, never surrender to a situation that you do not feel is a dharmic thing. And how do you know? Well, you just have to decide the best you can as you have more experience and more intuitive clarity, then it becomes very, very clear. So you don't surrender outwardly, but you have to surrender inwardly to the divine and the divine process. And so it's, as Devi said, surrender is not passivity. Surrender is a very powerfully willpower-driven decision that you're going to align what you want with what the divine wants. But you're not going to align what you feel is right with a world around you trying to force you into something wrong.
with regard to surrender, this was a spiritual seeker who was being trained by a holy man in South America. So he went to seek his teacher, and his teacher was training him, and he said within this environment, it was in the woods in the Amazon, the forest. He said everyone has a power place where they are connected with God. And I'm going to send you out on a spiritual quest to find your power place. And I want you to meditate in place after place till you feel that connection, where you feel the divine energy coming into you. And so this young man began, and he started out in the day, and he would sit and meditate here and there and here, and he kept going and going. And the day went on, and he was becoming more and more tired, and finally the evening, but he just was determined to do what the Guru had told him, his spiritual teacher. And he kept going and going and going. And the night wore on, and finally it was the early hours of the dawn, and he had just traveled a long, long distance and never finding what he was looking for. And finally, in total exhaustion, he just collapsed. And shortly afterwards, his spiritual teacher, his Guru, came up to him and said, "Oh, you have found your power place." So it's...
Yeah, and I would add also that willpower does not necessarily need to be expressed outwardly or aggressively. Swamiji was a person of tremendous willpower, and he expressed a lot of it outwardly, mainly in tasks that he was doing, or the work that he had to do, long and concentrated hours. But often with people, he would not express anything that looked like aggression, but he was like a rock in a river, a boulder in a river. If he thought something was right, nobody could move him. And people would get quite upset and angry with him that they wouldn't agree to do this or agree to do that or allow them. And he didn't fight them. He just didn't move from his position. And eventually those people either accepted his position or they moved around him and left. And he didn't fight against them. He just refused to be budged from what he knew. And that ability to rest in what you know is right is another expression of willpower. Well, maybe we've reached the end.